Okay, hello and welcome back to ZoyncTV. I'm Andrew Weir, and today I want to start a new series for the beginners of Blender 2.64, and that is the absolute beginners. So I'm starting off extremely basic, like moving the screen, how to get around Blender and whatever, and then we're going to slowly progress through all the different modes and so on, with modes being down here. We're going to move through a few of them. Some of them I'll ignore, like vertex paint. Texturing I will get round to, as well as weight paint I've already done, but they're not really the basics, they get a little bit more advanced. And so I'm going to go through quite a few things, and by the end of the series I'm hoping you can, if you wanted to, just make what you wanted. But you're going to want to follow more tutorials, but at least you'll know what you're doing. And so we may as well get started. And yeah, we're going to start off without moving anything. So if you've moved stuff, I just want you to go to File, New, and reload startup screen, and that'll send it all back to the original settings with this cube here. And you want it all to be normal, because after we change what I want you to change, and you click Save as Default, it's going to do whatever you have here as the default screen. So you're going to want to make sure that you don't save, if you have a massive load of work in front of you, which you probably don't, or if if you're all the way over here, you don't want to save this screen with it over there, because that'll just be annoying. You have to move back there every time. So what I want you to do is go to File, New, make sure that's the default screen, then go to File, User Preferences, and check Continuous Grab. It's really useful, so you may as well have it checked. And that's if you're on a PC, that's all you need to check. So we'll keep with that. And that means that now, when we press the middle mouse button to move around the screen, we can do this infinitely. So every time it hits the edge of the screen, it just loops back, and that eventually just becomes more useful. So it's always a good thing to have checked. So yeah, middle mouse button to move around the screen, and if we press Shift and the middle mouse button, we also move the screen like that in 3D space. And if we move all the way over here and press the middle mouse button again, we'll rotate roughly around where we just moved. So let's see, move over here, and we rotate around there when we just use the middle mouse button. And obviously you get more used to that as you get around later. And so now we'll look at these three items here, which are in the basic, startup screen, and that is a mesh or a cube, called meshes. All the objects in the screen are called meshes, like that, and a light, which if we right click we can select, a camera, right click to select, and back to the cube again. They are the three main things that we'll see here. And if we press left click, we'll move around this cursor, which is where things like spawn from. So that's where, if you want to add a new object, it will appear at this cursor where you've left clicked. So for instance, if we go up next to File to the Add button, we have a mesh, meshes being these cubes here and so on, and different shaped objects. We can add a sphere, and it's appeared exactly where that was there. So that's how that's done. And we can also press X to delete objects that we haven't got. So we need to right click even to select objects, and you can press X to delete. And Control Z is undo, as any other software. Which, also the same as any other software, we can press Shift to select multiple objects, which is pretty similar. And when you want to deselect an object, but you make sure that you've got them all selected, you're going to have to double click the object. So it's got one yellow outline and the rest in orange. If you want to deselect this lamp now, it's not currently yellow, so you click it once to make it yellow. Yellow meaning that it's the main object that we're looking at, and the other ones are just part of it, part of the selection, which will become clearer when you get around to it later, but that's basically what that does. But it means we've got this main one selected, and if we actually press Shift and right click it again, the yellow one, it'll deselect it. So then we've got two orange ones left. We right click it, it shows that we've got that one is yellow, and then we can right click it again and deselect. So that's how that works. If you want to deselect everything anyway, kind of like some other software, you can press A, and A will select all and deselect all, which is also pretty useful. But if you can't remember all these little buttons, which the first few are fairly basic, and the actual button that you're pressing is, like, if it's select all, A for all is pretty easy to remember. But if you can't remember it, you can always press the space bar, and that'll bring up a little search menu where you can literally, as long as you know the language which you want to know, type in even, then you can do whatever you want. So I want to select all, so I can type in select and space all, and there we go, there it is, meaning we can do that anyway. And if I just press that again, it's remembered that we've got select all typed in previously, and even here on the right it tells us what button is the shortcut. So that's kind of how I got started. If I wanted to do something I couldn't remember the shortcut, spacebar, and then just search. And the reason I say you need to know the kind of language which it needs is because if we right click and select this cube and we want to move it, so that's translate it, if we just press spacebar and type in move, then you're going to get all this crazy stuff, lists of it, loads of it, and you're not going to know which one to press. So the proper actual language for that would be translate. So type in translate, it's the only option there, and it tells us G is the button to press. So click that, and now when we move the mouse, we'll move the object. Fairly basic, but of course some users don't know this stuff, so we can quickly go through all this and hopefully get more advanced throughout the next tutorials. So yeah, press G to move this. Easy way to remember that is G for grab. And then there's also rotating, and that's easy with R. So just press R to do that, and that is the shortcut for rotate. Control Z, take it back to normal, and make sure you left click to place these objects. If you actually move something and you right click, it'll go straight back to that position where it started off as. So rotate, decide that you don't want to rotate it, or you've accidentally pressed R, press right click, and it'll take it back to the original position. But we do want to move it, so we're going to rotate, and we're going to left click, which gives us the rotation that we wanted. Again, I'm going to do that because that's just an example. And then scaling is the final one, so we're going to press scale, and that is S on the keyboard, and that allows you to move in and out, scaling it, but not, which is pretty basic as well. And then with these three, translate, rotate and scale, we can also press G, and if you know your X, Y and Z axis, you want to move it specifically on one of them. You can look down in the bottom left here, it actually tells you which one's which. Green is Y, X is red, and Z is blue. So we want to move it on the Y axis, that's green. Press G and then Y, and that will stick it only to moving it in that direction, forwards and backwards. GX does the same thing, and GZ does the same thing as well. Same with scaling on the Y-axis specifically, and then scaling on all the other ones as well. It all works. And with rotating, obviously, just to show you, that works as well. Getting a little bit more advanced on that, if you want to move something, but you don't want it to move in one of the ways, so let's say I want to move it in line with the floor, and I don't want it to move on the Z axis, we can press Shift Z, Z being the axis we don't want it to move on, press Shift Z, and it'll light up both the X and Y axis, which means now when I'm moving it, it's not going to move on the Z axis at all. So I can move it all the way over there, knowing that it's exactly in line with over here, but you know, I can also move it more than one way, so that's fairly useful. And that goes the same for scaling. I want to scale it just on the X and Y axis, so I press Shift Z, and it'll only scale outwards like that, as opposed to scaling completely like that. So that's, yeah, I said it all quickly. Obviously you can skip over that again, but that is the basics, and obviously it's kind of hard to make this tutorial because I already know all this stuff. It's second nature to what I'm doing, so I just do it without thinking. But that is the basics of how you would move around in object mode, and you can do all that stuff to meshes, but if you scale per light, it's not going to do much. You can only move a light, and you can scale the camera, but that doesn't really change much. So yeah. Okay, the next thing we're going to need to know is how to do a few different looks on the screen. So if we look at the number pad on, hopefully, if it's a Mac keyboard it's a little different, but on a PC keyboard, if you press the number pad and you press number 1, then we'll get the front view, and if you press 3 we get the side view. This is like direct from the side view, and then if you move all the way along to 7 you get the top view. And from this point we can only get the top, front and 1 side view. But if we want the back view we're going to have to press Control 1, and if we want the other side than just pressing 3 we can press Control 3, and if we press Control 7 we get the bottom view, 7 on its own, top view. Fairly basic again, just quickly going through it just so you know what you're doing. But then we've got all these buttons in between, so I'm going to go to the front view and then I'm going to press 2, and that will slowly take us, maybe I think it's 10 degrees probably, vertically around. And you know, I've never actually used that, but obviously it can be quite useful sometimes. 4 will take you horizontally around 10 degrees until you're back to where you started if you keep pressing it. And then 6, if I skip 5 currently, 6 does the opposite to 4, 4 taking you one way, 6 taking you the other way, and 8 does the opposite to 2, because it takes you up, 2 takes you down. And that's almost every number apart from 9, 0 and 5. And if I press 9 it doesn't actually do anything, it's the only one that doesn't do anything. But if I press 5 it's a little bit more confusing, because press 5 and it removes perspective. By removing perspective, I hope you can see the difference here. Obviously that's a bit more 3D like that than pressing 5 one more time to get rid of perspective. It's a lot more 3D than that is, and what that means is now when I press 1 we get a direct view, so that's like a flat square now. But if I press 5 again it's pretty much a flat square, but we are actually still seeing it a little bit differently. So if I view it from this side here and I press 5, there's not a massive difference, but it is actually removing perspective from the scene, and that makes it a little bit easier when you're going to the side view, because you can accurately see your object directly, and it becomes more useful later on. It's just if I press 7 and things, it's a lot easier to see what you're doing. So that's the views. The final one is pressing 0. So let's press 0 now, and that will take us into the view of the camera, which obviously helps when you're scaling up the scene and when you're seeing what you want to see through the camera without rendering it. Which leads me to actually rendering a scene. So up here on the left we can press render and then render image, and that camera view that we just saw when I pressed 0, the rendered image is what the final result will be. So we're just creating it, we're changing all the textures and things, we're creating our 3D object, and we come up here to render it, and there we go. I'm kind of assuming you know what 3D software is, but some of this stuff isn't too obvious if you've just found the software, so sorry if it's a bit too easy to all this stuff. But we've done about 15 minutes now, and what I want to do finally is just show you a little bit around all the edges. So top part here we've already looked at. We've got file, add, render, and window, we don't really need that. and help, obviously just for help. Then we've got this part up here which actually is changing the scene. So if you're looking at something, like when I say something I mean a specific part of Blender, such as compositing, you'll eventually know what it is, and when you do come around to it, if you click the compositing part of this, it just changes the scene to something a little bit more better for the render. So I want to render now. The render's over there on the left. We can also change all the stuff here, which I'm not going to go into, but it does make it a lot easier. And we've also got the 3D scene down here, so we can still edit everything, just slightly differently. Change that back, just go to default. And if you're making a game and you want to change the logic, you can either customize the scene yourself, or you can just go here, click game logic, and this is everything you'll need in a game. So a bit confusing at the moment, but I'm just telling you that it's up there. We'll take it back to the default, and we've got an animation scroll bar down here, which is just your frames. We'll have to get into that a little bit later, because it's a little bit too advanced, like for this first part. So we'll ignore that. That's all animation stuff, such as making keyframes and so on. And then we've got our modes down here. The modes only really apply to the mesh. So the mesh has like 6 modes, and the lamp only has object mode along with the camera. So that's where the different modes are, and we'll get into them a little bit later as well. There are a few useful things in here which I'm not going to go through because it's all named very good. So you can kind of know what you're doing there. Snap and things, I think you can pretty much work them out. Select, that's also got some useful names. So I don't think I need to go through that, just so long you know it's there. Take a look at it and I'm sure you'll know what you're doing. So I think we're reaching the end of this. We've got this side bar here, and if we look up here on the top right, we have what's equivalent to the layers which you would have on Photoshop or After Effects and so on. So imagine the layers here. You can select each layer being a different object. You can see what's inside the layer, so cube, open it up, we've just got a cube in there, and then the material and a texture, but we haven't got a texture. So it pretty much just breaks down objects into this file system, which also, just like layers on Photoshop or whatever, lets you hide it. So from sight, if you want to close the eye to make it invisible, we'll ignore the mouse, that doesn't do much, locks it really. And then also the camera here, if we uncheck that, that means that it's invisible from the render. So if I render an image, we can see the cube. If I take away the camera, we can render an image again, and we've taken away the cube, so there's no camera. There's no cube in the camera's view, according to the render. And finally, we can look over here to the right, and we have these different settings up here. I'm not really going to go through them, but if you are in a tutorial and they say go to the render settings, then that's the camera. If they want scene settings, there's next to the camera. Then there's the world settings, which is what happens around the outside of the scene. Individual object settings, which is the cube. Constraints, we'll ignore. Modifiers, when they say that you need to add this modifier, click the little spanner there and find the correct modifier which you want to go through. Vertex data, that is not object data even, that's not too important currently. Materials, textures, particle systems, and then finally the pre-made effects or physics. And that is pretty much a run through of all the important stuff that you'll need to know when you first get onto Blender. The next tutorial should be edit mode and a few things in there, and after that we'll continue to sculpt mode, we'll look at modifiers, we'll look at textures, we'll look at materials, and hopefully we'll run through the whole thing so that when you move over to other tutorials, you'll have a good idea of what to do. So thanks for watching. I hope you subscribe to see the rest of the series, and I'll see you in the next video.